Well, the biggest threat to global economic recovery is that there are not enough people around with the right skills to deliver on business plans. This will be the single biggest challenge to global leaders in the years to come. That's the view of Heidrick Struggles Leadership Advisory Services. Their global managing partner, Steve Langton, joins me now with more. Steve, thanks for coming to the studio today.
Thanks for having me.
Steve, according to your stats, over 200 million people around the world working in countries other than the place of their birth. Is that a concern, though?
It's new, it's happened rapidly over the last 7 years. The concern is not enough of it's happening. When you look at the rise of new businesses and enterprise in what we've always called the developing world, in China and India, and the lack of executive and labour power to be able to realise some of those commercial needs, we're going to need to see very complex mechanisms that allow talent to mobilise from the North American, European, African states and move around the world much more frequently.
And of course, we see lots of professionals leaving South Africa to go work in Europe, the United States, Australia, but we also hope to attract talents from those countries to come work in South Africa. Are we seeing a good two-way flow?
You've lost about a million people in our reckoning in the last 9 years. People who've left South Africa have been very successful overseas. Indeed, some of the very fine CEOs and boards that we're working with, it's South African presence there, which is having that impact. Are we going to see the pipeline coming back? Well, if we look at the experience of 2010 for South Africa and look at what happened in Sydney in 2000, it had a recognition effect. It saw organisations wanting to reposition headquarters, new growth into the main regions in those central cities. And I'd like to think that impact will see some of that recovery of talent back to South Africa for leadership post the World Cup.
And of course, as you say, some of our people are very successful overseas. Lots of them do come back though, and they bring some of that experience back to South Africa. So it can be positive as well, can't it?
Should be very positive. Some of the learnings that come, it also needs sharing. There's a lot of learning coming from governance in South Africa right now, which is going to be very valuable to the recovery of boards and organisations in North America. I don't think that's enough shared. Some of the work, for instance, the benchmark work in 2 areas, in the King report, version 3 that's happening here, and also in the work in Dynacang, scenarios for a nation. The adoption of those ideas in other nations is being seen as very attractive right now.
So we do have some positive things happening in our economy, though. Yeah. Are we doing enough, though, to train our own skills base and to attract a skills base to South Africa? What should we be doing?
There's 2 conditions for success of South Africa going forward, which other nations we're working in envy. The first of them is the fact that there's a prediction and a potential for more than 5% GDP growth going forward. That's dwarfed by the fact that the population of not just South Africa, but its main primary region, Africa itself, is normal and stable and growing. Everywhere else, populations are shrinking and working populations are shrinking. The population of China's working has stopped in 2008. So if you take those 2 variables together that are very much envied by European nations, by North America, the missing variable is educating that population of talent to use it. And I think what we're going to be seeing is much more the role of what are we doing to educate earlier the population that will be the main competitive advantage of this nation.
Do you think our education system may be lacking in that regard?
From what I'm hearing from the organisations we're talking to here, they're concerned about that. And yet perhaps the development of future talent isn't just the responsibility of governments. What we're seeing in other nations, I think, is a very honourable and aspirational idea that organisations perhaps should be taking a role in funding and developing a generation that are today schools, today universities, to say that they've already got the talent that says they're able to populate their business plans in a way that the Chinese are struggling with right now.
When you say the organisations you're talking to here, who are you talking to here and what sort of advice can you give them?
The organisations are across all industries, but classically it's those at governance, so chairman, directors and CEO level, which is where Heidrick Struggles has predominantly operated over the last 60 years. And bringing not just intuition, but very forensic advice of what we've learned from the collapse of organisations in North America and Europe. And it's bringing some of that learning into South Africa to say, actually, at a time when there's all the variables that say potential for this nation to be very competitive going forward, let's make sure that we've learned all the derailers that happened in the very successful nations up to this point.
Of course, you mentioned King 3 and the corporate governance structures that are in place in South Africa. Of course, we know King 3 is a code.
Yeah.
Globally, though, we are seeing more regulations and more potential restrictions on directors coming through. What sort of impact is that going to have going forward, do you think?
Some of it is so regularised that we may be even seeing some restraint and constrictions on management. In North America right now, there are 9 new bills sitting in Congress. They have nebulous names such as the Shareholders Reform Act, the Shareholder Bill of Rights, the Corporate Governance Reform Act. If all of them come through, we're going to see a very strong constraint on management. And I wonder whether that's appropriate at a time when we should be trusting management, freeing it up to make decisions that are much more entrepreneurial about how the market's going to go forward.
But of course, in the past, we did trust management, and it hasn't always ended up happy, has it?
Yeah, well, it wasn't management that was trusted. It was more the technology and the processes of science, what a process we often call the emperor's new clothes. We made it very, very complex on some of the management decisions happening. It's a time to go back to basics on what commerce is about, and new leadership are going to be taking much more simple principles for that. So I hope that things that are called codes, which is what the UK and South Africa are introducing, allow the interpretation of that to be far more sustainable than laws that will be policed.
Steve, we have to leave it there, but thanks very much for taking some time out from your trip to come in here.
Thank you, it's a pleasure.